Hi, this is Tim Cool, and welcome to course 011, First Impressions. And I just want to welcome you to this course brought to you by the Council for Facility Stewardship. So let's get started. This is kind of a follow-up to another course that we had about seeing your facility through the eyes of a guest. So let's go ahead and jump in here and talk about first impressions. If you remember, the precursor to this course was the comments about whether or not you have guests or visitors at your church and how words mean things. And as a refresher, I think we all want to use the term guest instead of visitor. And why is that important? Well, go back and check out course 010, and you can learn more about that. So one of the questions that I get asked frequently is who's our competition? And so who do you all envision to be your competition? Who is out there that you envision to be, quote, the competition at your church? One of the things that I'm very strong opinionated on is the fact that it is not another congregation. If we believe that another church, another Bible believing church is our competition, we've lost our kingdom mindedness. And so we need to set aside the idea that another church is our competition. I can remember talking with clients in the past that would say, well, you know, the Methodists down the street, they have a new gym, so we at First Baptist need to go ahead and build a gym to keep our youth. Well, that's a competitive nature that I don't think is healthy. And why compete with each other for things that are not kingdom focused? So who then really is your competition? Your first competitor is, why should a person get out of bed in the weekend to come to your church on a weekend? That's the number one competitor of any church, regardless of denomination. The second competitor is activities. We live in a time-starved culture. Between sports and kids' activities, the chance to get to the lake, go have coffee with some friends, whatever those activities are, that's your second biggest competitor. Your next bigger competitor is every other consumeristic experience they had during the week. Whether or not that is the barista at Starbucks that always gets their coffee just the way they want it, or the dry cleaner that never pops a button, or clean restrooms at retail stores. Let me give you a prime example. My wife and I have triplets, and when they were young, there's a grocery chain here in the Carolinas that we would visit regularly on a Saturday. So we could frankly have something to do with the kids. So if we went there on a Saturday, you take triplets to a store like that, there's generally one place that we always ended up: the restroom. Now, we might go to the meat section, then the restroom, and then the milk, and then the restroom, and so on. And with three kids, there were generally 3 trips to the restroom. Well, the restrooms at this food chain, they had the nicest public restrooms. They had tiled floors. They had clean countertops, clean mirrors, the updated sheet of when they had come through and done up freshening and whatnot was always updated. There wasn't paper overflowing from the trash receptacles. They were clean. And so think about it. If that was my wife and I's experience, and if we were non-believers and that was our Saturday experience, would we have a similar experience at your church on Sunday? Other competitors would be the fine dining experience, or the Class A office space that maybe many of your congregation and your guests work at. Free Wi-Fi. Think of today, at least for myself, I'm constantly thinking, okay, if I'm going to go hang out someplace, where do I get free Wi-Fi? Well, that's a competitor. And then number 7, it's you fill in the blank. What are the other things that are competitors? So think with me for a minute. If this mom with her kids showed up on a Sunday or a weekend service for you, what story do you want her to tell her coworkers on Monday when she goes back to work? Do you want her to say, hey, I had to drop off the kids, I had to take them to 3 different places, I got lost in the building. I didn't know where to go. No one was helpful. And by the time I got into the service, I was 10 minutes late. I was totally annoyed. Couldn't wait to get home. That's most likely not the story most of us would want to have a first-time guest tell her coworkers about her experience at our church on a weekend. So here's a quick little task, homework assignment that you all can do with your staff and your team is write a script, write a story of the ideal first-time guest experience. So here's some components that you can use. What's the ideal first-time experience? And remember, this starts from the moment they learn about you. And most likely for most of us, even if you invite somebody, what do we generally do in today's culture? Well, we immediately go to the website and determine, is this someplace I want to go? Even if you invited me to the nicest restaurant in your town, I am most likely going to go to the website and determine, okay, what's the menu? How are people dressed? What are their hours of operation? How long of a drive is it going to be from our house to that place? That first time experience starts at the website. It then moves on to pulling into the parking lot. And again, a lot of this goes back to course 010, where we talked about how we want guests to see us for the first time. What's it like to walk up to our buildings for the first time? Are there 50 doors facing the parking lot? And is it obvious where we want them to go? How about the initial interactions? Do we want there to be a great interaction with people? How about dropping off the kids, the worship experience, etc.? So what I encourage you to do is write that script and get your ministry leaders to write it as to what is the ideal first-time guest experience, not what it's like today, but what would we want it to be? That script then can be used for a couple of ways. One, you can see where your weak spots are. So if you've written down or you know what your current experience is, and then you say this is the ideal experience, you can see where the chasm may be. The other thing it does is it gives you a great training tool. If you said from the time someone pulls into the parking lot to the time they walk up to the front door, we want them to have an interaction with 3 people from our parking lot ministry or greeters. Now all of a sudden you have a training tool to work with your volunteers and staff. This is what we're really talking about here is being intentional, which is just, it's done on purpose. It's deliberate. Something as simple as having additional greeters, while you may have a challenge recruiting volunteers, it's not a costly thing. Matter of fact, most of the things that we would do to make a guest feel more welcome, make our facilities feel more welcome, are not high cost items. They're just require someone to have some intentionality about it. And intentionality doesn't have to be more expensive. So let's talk about first impressions. And again, we're talking about first impressions to guests. So again, we want to continue to build on that from course 010, that we have guests, not visitors. And so how do we build on this first impression for guests? It is said that you have 7 seconds to make a first impression. Now, that could be 7 seconds, could be 20 seconds, whatever it happens to be. The reality is, many of us make a snap judgment about a first impression. What's the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do it. And the cover of our church is the facilities, the grounds, the interactions. So there's going to be 7 seconds or whatever that happens to be to build these first impressions. And in a first-time guest experience at a church, there's a multitude of first experiences that are either going to build or they're going to detract from that person's impression of your church. And too often, people will make that initial impression even before they've heard a sermon or heard music. They're going to say, okay, if I have to do this every Sunday and drag my kids all over this campus, it's not worth it. Or if it is this hard to get from the parking lot to the front door, I'm just not going to put myself through this. And while some of us may be provoked that sounds like consumerism, the reality is we're all consumers. And for a first-time guest, that may or may not even be a believer, may or may not be the denomination that you are. They are going to be looking for some things that you may just take for granted because it's your church. So where does this start? We've kind of hit on it already, but it starts with your website. It used to be that the front porch is where people would sit in communities and they'd learn about what's going on in the community. They would talk about what's happening. I can remember my grandfather, he would take me up to the corner store in Canton, Ohio, and we'd sit on rocking chairs and eat pumpkin seeds, and you'd hear about what's going on in the community. Because there weren't computers, there weren't cell phones. That's how you got to communicate was through word of mouth. Well, today, the new front porch is Google or Bing or whatever search engine you prefer. It's no longer something that we rely on having to be in person to get that front porch experience. And so our website matters. Our rankings matter. Here's just a couple of examples of websites that, you look at them and I wonder, what are we trying to communicate? The purple one, could you imagine having a page on your website for women of your church and have a picture of Britney Spears pop up in the corner? What story is that communicating? Or if you use clip art and all the pictures on your website represent people that are maybe of an age bracket that's different than what you are, that could be a turnoff as well. And so we need to be cognizant about how we are communicating even before people get to our physical facility. So we start with website. The next step is our streetscape and exterior design. So here's some images that I've taken over the years. Could you imagine going by a sign, "Going to hell, you are welcome"? What does that communicate? Or in the bottom left-hand corner, that's what used to be Touchdown Jesus between Dayton and Cincinnati. And that was since hit by lightning and burned down. And they have a new version of it with his arms stretched out, which is much more, I think, appropriate. Don't let worries kill you, let the church help. I understand what they're trying to communicate here, but to have people driving past my sign with that kind of saying, I don't know that really communicates what the heart of that particular church is. Or a building that maybe has a really, really austere look to it. These things matter. These things are communicating story that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So after streetscape and exterior design comes the parking lot. So parking lots are an interesting opportunity and challenge. So in many cases, parking lots were not designed with the intent of good traffic flow. It may be decent for parking, but not traffic flow. If you think about going to any kind of an event venue, and let's face it, a church is an event venue. Sunday morning worship is an event. An event is nothing more than something that's taking place that people are coming to for public consumption. If you go to a well-done event center, whether that's an amusement park, a professional ball field, something like that, they have ring roads, they have traffic designed in such a way that you're not commingling pedestrian and vehicular traffic. It's what has been referred to by friends of mine in the industry as the river of death, that area between the building and the parking lot where cars are zipping back and forth between services, and you feel like you're having to play Frogger to safely make it from the building to your car. The other thing with parking lots is it is a wonderful opportunity for ministry and volunteerism. You see the picture here of the gentleman, and it could be ladies in vests. I was part of a church plant in Charlotte back in the 80s, and back then I was much younger, and we used to play basketball in the Sanctinasium, gymatorium, whatever you wanted to call it, on Saturday mornings, with the agreement that when we were done, we set up the chairs and put out the hymnals, which if you're less than 30 years old, a hymnal is a book with songs in it. And that was part of the deal. Well, when the church built a new building with pews, our ministry was no longer needed, our setup ministry. And that group kind of fell apart. And for the longest time, that group was my small group. That's the guys that I saw every Saturday that you could ask about life and how they were doing and you know, how the kids. Well, when that stopped, I felt like I had a part of my life missing. Well, if that church in that time would have said, hey, we're going to move you guys out to the parking lot ministry because the church has grown, we need help out there, those guys would have probably rallied around the opportunity to still serve and do it in a what we interpreted to be warm, fuzzy kind of thing. None of us were the kind of guys you were going to put in your nursery. You just didn't want us there. But to wave, to wear a cool orange vest and a neat walkie-talkie, we probably would have all been into that. So the parking lot is not just a place to park cars. It's a place to start interaction with people and start to create relationships. So after parking lot comes wayfinding, internal and external. Wayfinding is kind of a fancy way of saying signage, directional clues, and so on. It's basically helping people find their way to their designated location. So Walt Disney used to say that you could get a dog to do anything you want using one of two methods and using the same stick. One is you can take the stick and you could beat the dog and have them submit to you that way. Or you could take that same stick, put a weenie on the end, and lead the dog. And that's just a great analogy when we think about wayfinding and how do we lead people instead of force them down a path. So if you've ever been to Disney World, after you've turned by the fire station there and you look down Main Street, USA, what's the first thing you see? Well, it's probably pretty obvious by the picture on your screen right now, is it's Cinderella's castle. There's no signs that are saying go to Cinderella's castle. There's no ushers passing out leaflets to show you how to get to Cinderella's castle. It is a weenie that is obvious, and it sucks people in. If you even notice, some of the architecture starts decreasing in height to draw you closer to the castle. So how do we utilize weenies more in our church facilities to lead people to different parts of the building? There's multiple ways that can be done. Parking lot signage, signage on the ground, utilizing empty wall spaces for signage and creativity. All of these things are unique opportunities that needs to first and foremost be congruent with who you are and the story you're trying to communicate, and be relatively easy to understand. You know, whether it's, you know, your name signs at doors or Wi-Fi signs, whatever it happens to be, what are things that will create a sense of wayfinding and understanding where I am at any point in time in my building? I've been in many church buildings where I would have loved to have had a GPS system of the building that I couldn't find my way around. If there had been really obvious centerpiece points along the way, it would have been enormously helpful for me to navigate their buildings. So I travel a great deal, and at least pre-COVID, I traveled a lot. And when I would land at a new airport, there were three signs that I constantly looked for: the stick figure man, the car with the key, and the luggage. So restroom, rental car, and baggage claim. The minute I saw those three signs, my anxiety would go down because I knew I could navigate that airport. Well, think about that for your first-time guests. If you have a first-time guest, their anxiety level could be elevated as they're coming into the building. And as a man, it's illegal for me to ask directions. So my anxiety stays up pretty high until I can figure it out myself. Now, my wife, on the other hand, would immediately ask somebody, hey, how do I get my kids to their kids' ministry area? Not me. I'm going to try to figure it out. And so what kind of clues, what kind of weenies, what kind of obvious things can be done to help people navigate your campus the best possible. And sometimes that cannot be done with physical attributes. Sometimes that has to be done with a group of volunteers with orange colored t-shirts that are leading you to places that you don't know how to get to, which may require more human capital on your part. Perfect world, if you were designing a new church building from scratch, you'd create kind of a hub and spoke where you'd walk into this hub and then you'd be able to see worship, children's ministry, youth, restrooms, and so on. That would be a perfect world. But most of us have buildings that we've inherited, and so we have to look at things a little differently. Now, this was unique. This had all the right signs, except for that second one from the bottom. That was probably the first time I'd run into one that said yoga room. And so if you're going to have a yoga room, good to have a sign for it. So after wayfinding comes our interactions. I don't care how good or bad your facility may be, or how congruent or incongruent it is with your story. Interactions can make or break the experience for a first-time guest. I've gone to buildings that were just opulent, and the interactions with people were lackluster at best, and I did not have a good experience. At the same time, I've been to church services that were meeting in junior high schools that were a little run down, but because of the interaction, the enthusiasm, the excitement of the people there, the greeters, the banners out front, you name it, the interaction was off the chain. And so don't miss out on the fact that interactions can both make a situation that's less congruent with your liking. It can also detract from one that has a great facility. Many of you, I'm sure, have been to an Apple store. And so there's one thing that's missing in almost every Apple store, and it's a checkout line. The Apple employees, you can notice there in the green shirt on the right-hand side, that's a customer service person that is helping somebody, and they're checking them out as they do it. They've created this dialogue, not just from the assistance portion, but also to the whole checkout process. That gives people an opportunity to build a relationship, to talk, to have dynamics that otherwise you wouldn't have. Excuse me. This kind of interaction builds culture and doesn't tear it down. After interactions comes the condition. And for many of you in the church stewardship and facility stewardship and facility management world, this is where things really fall on your shoulders. People see things that you no longer see, your congregation no longer sees. They see the peeling paint. They see the grass growing up in your parking lot and the duct tape holding the carpet together. There are times that you will walk into your building and you won't see those. Even though a first-time guest, those kind of things become very obvious to them. The stained ceiling tiles, the collapsed ceilings. And the pictures I've just showed you and you're currently looking at are all pictures of church facilities that we have inspected over the years. And these are facilities that have been in these conditions for years. So what does that say to a first-time guest? What does it say when they walk in and water fountains are corroded and you've got asbestos tile and the area under urinals look like they haven't been cleaned in decades, dirty vents and so on? What it generally says to people is, if you can't take care of your building, how are you going to take care of me and my family? If you care that little about something God has entrusted to you, how little are you going to care about me and my family? And I've said it before, I'm going to keep saying it. A building will never save a soul, and it will never disciple someone. But for a first-time guest, these kind of things are the kind of things that will turn people off, that will right off the bat say, we're not coming back. I mean, if that top left-hand picture, if that was my children's classroom, and I walked in as a first time and saw ripped up carpet falling apart with duct tape, I would have told my child we're going someplace else, we probably wouldn't even stay for the service. I've actually told churches and reports that I would not leave my children in their children's area. I had a meeting recently with a church, and I asked them who their target market was, and they said families with small kids. And I said, well, it's not. And they looked at me shocked. And I said, have you been to your kids' area lately? If you are trying to reach families with small kids, you would have given more attention to your children's ministry area. So we have to be very cognizant of what the condition of our building is communicating to people. A number of years ago, I was on a US Air flight. And for those of you who are too young to remember US Air, it's now American. But we were on this flight, and I noticed as I sat down, the carpet was tattered. The seat I was sitting in had ravelings down the side of it. The TV that they showed the safety meetings or safety video on was one of those old tube types that they had to push up into the ceiling. And the staff just did not seem happy. And I told my wife, I said, if this is what they want their first impression to be to the paying public, then what's going on underneath this plane that I can't see? What is the condition of the engine? What's the condition of the tires that we're getting ready to take off on, if this is what they're willing to allow the public to see? Same thing applies to our churches. We have to take these very seriously. So first impressions, they matter, and they should matter to you. They're going to matter to your guests. So what can you do to make first impressions a priority? Again, this does not mean that you have to be opulent. It does not mean that you have to go build new buildings, but let's be intentional and have that idea of what would a first-time guest, what would their first impressions be? Thank you for taking your time to watch this video. Please continue to watch this series. We will have more here shortly. Have a great day.